For me, what got me playing D&D regularly was in 1978, the Monster Manual was already out. The Player's Handbook came out. And we said, cool, Jack Vance's magic system from the dying earth. This is like, and this was a complete framework for spells and magic items and how they worked that meant that it wasn't just the author writing fiction cheating.
Sure.
You know, having the magic do whatever the plot needed at the end to wind up the story.
Yeah.
And in the same way, the Monster Manual had cool new monsters and all the stuff we knew from mythology plus dinosaurs all ranked to each other with their hit points or whatever. So we said, this is really cool.
So I was 10 when I first started playing D&D. I discovered it quite by accident when I saw the first edition Monster Manual in a store on a rack. And I was so intrigued by the cover that I picked it up, started flipping through it, and instantly fell in love with the black and white art of the monsters and just the mystery around the statistics that were presented with these monsters. Because I had read mythological books before and things like that, but they never had the monster sort of codified as a stat block.
Yeah.
And I wanted to deconstruct it. So I took the book home and I kind of didn't understand the game at all. Mm-hmm. I thought this was just a weird thing where maybe I could have the monsters fight each other. And that's kind of what I did.
By the time I got a core rule book, my first one was also the Monster Manual. Mm-hmm. And then with the original cover, but my first player's handbook was the first edition player's handbook that had the second cover. So there was that original cover with the idol on it, and then there was the redo that had the wizard Ringlarun on it, and that was my first player's handbook.
We have, of course, the core 4 books, the Player's Handbook, DMG, Monster Manual, and D&D Demigods. I remember in 1986 seeing those in a 4-paneled cardboard display in my small town in Wisconsin, which is amazing. I mean, I was just fortunate to live near ground zero of D&D. That didn't happen anywhere else in the world, you know?
These 3 booklets appeared in 1975. They were actually first published in 74, but if you weren't at a Midwestern college as a student hanging out, you didn't find out about it until 1975, because that's when they started to make their ways out of Lake Geneva. And we bought them because it was something fantasy and science fiction. We sat down and read them and said, oh, this is a really cool idea, but it's just going to devolve into an argument. Forget it.
Sure.
And we put it away.
Yeah.
And then when the first supplement came out, Greyhawk, and added the Beholder, added Mind Flayers, added the Rogue as a class, and we were looking and all these cool magic items. It was like, oh, this is something, you know.
And then finally, the other cabinet over there, of course, is where it all started, the OD&D cabinet. He's got a very nice white box. That's Bill's brown box, the first print brown box. Mm-hmm. And so Gen Con releases, and the original got some fragments of the drafts of OD&D from 1973 as they were being shared between Gygax and the Arneson camp. So that was through the mail. John Peterson's done a wonderful job outlining all that process in his new book. So that's also in that. And the final cabinet that he's got is 50 years of D&D history book, which is awesome. Yeah. And it has reprints of the manuscripts in that book. It's amazing.
And then in the cabinet in the middle here, you talked about how it's what we think a game might have looked like. I mean, it looks pretty similar. You know, the dimensions are kind of slightly different, but it looks pretty similar to a game we might run today.
Well, what you got, which I love what John did with that, is that you see that he's got the outdoor survival box, and he's got a hex map out. And that's what the game was starting, was a hex crawl. D&D has war game roots. Tape measures on a sand table, that's where D&D came from. And because of that, that's when the game evolved into a role-playing game. It started looking much more like that. You still can play hex crawl kind of style games today, but it's not very common. Everything's now on a grid, and but that's what it looks like then.
It was really a seismic shift for all of us when I6 Ravenloft came out. Right. And that not only was a seismic shift for us, it was really for the entire industry, because that was one of the main first instances of an adventure where the whole thing was driven by the motivations of the key villain, who also was not nailed into place in one room, but was actually moving around the adventure.
Sure.
And that, for us from that point on, story really jumped into the front seat for us.
Ravenloft was kind of an epiphany moment where the realization that you could take the adventure out of the traditional dungeon and build it around motivations and character was sort of revolutionary for my gaming group.
You go from in the mid 80s now, the transition into second edition Dungeons and Dragons, and that's a very complicated story as to why that happened, possibly trying to get Gary out of the company at that point, and also his claim for the royalties. Depends who you ask, it's very hotly discussed and debated issue. But leaving it aside, we got the second editions of Dungeons and Dragons, which there are two printings. There's the blue writing ones and then the black covers. These ones are 1987 on the top, and the black covers are 1995. And for me, second edition Dungeons and Dragons is actually my favorite edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And the reason is that there's a lot of weird things in AD&D in the rules. If you're going to read as written, try to play it as written. It's a really challenging game. And if you talk to any AD&D player, they pretty much house ruled a lot of stuff. Second edition, despite the fact that a lot of the content was done in response to the Satanic Panic stuff.
Is that where we get things like Batazu and Tannery?
Exactly. They dump devils and demons and stuff which was unfortunate, and we lose the assassin class, we lose the thief class, we then officially go to the rogue instead. But whatever, that was all window dressing. What I liked about it is that second edition D&D had the concepts of domains.
Yeah.
So if you're and that's what we see now in modern D&D. You're a cleric of life, and that's okay. You're associated with that sort of deity. That's how you get your power. There's no explanation for cleric magic in AD&D. It just sort of happened.
Right.
And now we have an explanation. And also we go from the 2 hit tables to THAC0, infamous THAC0, which is a little easier. I know it looks weird now, but it was much easier than that. But in addition, we have the birth of the Forgotten Realms.
Gary Gygax was pushed out of TSR. Lorraine Williams, who became the head of TSR, did not want to publish Greyhawk, his world, anymore. And so she said, get me a new campaign setting. And they took all the company's resources in 2 years to build instead of Greyhawk, Dragonlance. Problem with that was they told one big epic story, like The Lord of the Rings, a quest to save the world. And at the end, they've saved the world. What do you do for an encore? Okay, number one. And number two, it had taken all of the company's resources for 2 years. And instead, they were looking for a kitchen sink world.
So we have in that cabinet, that's actually a first edition version of the Forgotten Realms. They released it right before second edition came on. So then there are about probably 7 printings of the Forgotten Realms box. I actually, as I told you, I have one in my hotel room because we didn't have room, with Greyhawk folio in there. And then there's at the bottom, there is Ed's summary of the Forgotten Realms that he sent to Lorraine Williams.
Oh, wow.
And that's what that is. But she wanted what is this?
Yeah.
And so he produced that. I said, Ed, why is it so thick? That doesn't sound like a summary. He's like, well, I couldn't condense it any further.
Mike Dobson just offered me, we'd like to buy your world, lock, stock, and wizard. I said, sure. He goes, don't you want to know how much we're going to? No, I don't care. Because I wanted color maps that didn't have pencil crayon streaks. When I'm doing the seas and these blue streaks, so I thought, no, I know they can just print them.
Yeah.
And it'll be beautiful. I wanted the maps. So I said, sure, I don't care. So, and from that day to this, I worked on the Forgotten Realms every day of my life. I'm still working on it.
Sure.
And that's umpteen products. I think if you total up everything that has a Forgotten Realms logo on it, that is its own product, as opposed to a magazine article or a web article, I think you're comfortably over 1,200 Realms releases.
Yeah, and a few other things. We have the basic D&D iterations on the top shelf. You start with the home set going forward, and then just dragon dice and a few other fun things in there. The other thing that I really like about second edition, of course, is the birth of the settings.
Yeah,
we're still living that world as a result. This is where not only Forgotten Realms, but then Dark Sun and Planescape and Al-Qadim and all these other settings came out. Every year I would come to Gen Con, they would announce another setting. I was like, my God, it just I couldn't even keep up.
It was a huge shift for me because up to that point, my only contact was the adventure modules that were all sort of separately packaged.
The original DL series, the Dragonlance series.
That's true. That was actually the original adventure path.
Even though I think it did lay the groundwork for the later adventure paths, it also was so focused on very specific characters that I remember even having arguments with my friends on like whether, was it okay to make our own characters for these, or did we need to play the characters from the novels who were included in some of those adventures?
Looking at that other cabinet, we're starting to move into 3rd edition. There's some books in there I recognize because my brother had them. My older brother got into them. What was it like when that was starting to hit shelves?
The first was 3rd edition. That was released, and it had all kinds of balance problems with it, and so they quickly pivoted to go to 3.5. I remember seeing those books, and people remarked, "Gosh, you guys are still playing 1E?" So I was like, "Well, we're just a little, but we were a little bit behind. We were later adopters. We played a lot of 3.5 about 10 years after it came out, and that for us, we transitioned into Pathfinder and stuff like that too, which is like derivation of the same game.
Yeah,
but 3.5 was huge shift. I mean, you move from much more of a skill-focused feats, things like that, these modern concepts in gaming, that there are some supplements in 2nd edition that were optional, the player's guide to dwarves, the player's guide to elves, all that kind of stuff that were giving kind of what looked like feats and skills, which they turned out to be later. 3.3.0 and 3.5 actually codified those, and those are staples of D&D now in almost many game systems. Right? The concept of skills is, axiomatic, in gaming now. Let's see, I guess the rest, other than the OD&D cabinet, which we really haven't talked about, we have the 4th edition, which, I will be perfectly honest, that's the edition I know least about. It wasn't because I hated 4th edition necessarily. Just was a time in life when I was in law school, and I just was busy trying to, figure out what I'm going to do when I grow up and all that. I was aware of it coming out and being a thing, but I just wasn't playing D&D there for a spot.
For 4th edition, there was a 100-year time jump.
Yeah.
And there was a company policy that they didn't want to talk about what happened during the time jump. They weren't going to publish anything. We broke that right away, by the way.
Gen Con was originally owned by TSR. It was their own product. And they got split off some years later. But for many years, Gen Con was a promotional tool for TSR. So that was the intimate relationship between Gen Con and D&D existed for a long time. It's not nearly as much today. Just virtually not at all. But still in the 4E era, that was still this is the big show. And so publishers, especially Wizards of the Coast at that point, wanted to have big product releases here. And that cabinet that are the transition between 4E, D&D Next, and then 5th edition. And that's what for that final cabinet is, the playtest packets. I remember getting those, and and the 5th edition version of Keep on the Borderlands, because that's what that is. I ran that module for the guys, hey, let's try this new rule set with this module we know very well. We're like, that's pretty good.
Ever since the two of us together, along with the rest of the team, could really push things and help guide where we were going, we have been motivated by this desire to make D&D welcoming to as many people as possible. Sure. And doing that in many different ways. That includes what we depict in our art, that includes the kinds of stories we tell, that includes making sure our game system appeals to different play styles. That's one of the reasons why in 5th edition we've closely guarded the ability to have a improv heavy theater of the mind game, or a let's put out our massive diorama on the table with miniatures. Again, making sure that D&D remains this game that can encompass many different styles of play, many different aesthetics. And what we have found is that indeed has brought more people than ever before to the game.
And I really enjoyed 5th edition D&D. I still do. I love D&D. It got me into doing all the authorship that I do now.
Yeah, okay.
So I was like, this is the rule set that I would like to write for.
Our world.
Yeah.
Because everybody affects it. I can't really kick at somebody else coming into my kitchen and making something, because they might make something that's really cool. And so my world now seems alive because I'm not the only creator. My world for the first time can surprise me.
Yeah, right.
Because somebody else did something and they went a place I wouldn't go. They're writing in a different style than I would have written. Mm-hmm. So the world seems more alive.
Following advice that Dave Arneson gave me when I, as a kid, asked him a question at a panel at that convention back when I was a teenager. And I don't even remember what my question was. All I have ever remembered is what Dave said back to me. And that was, whatever you do, always invite new people to try this game out so that it will always grow.
The times we've done Acquisitions Inc. live games, the streaming shows, all of that is the people who have watched those games and seen, played through our adventures. The feedback I hear that it most impresses upon me is, thank you for welcoming me and into this game, and thank you for giving me this creative outlet and this opportunity to basically escape from whatever is in, whatever travails are in their daily world, and that sense of I have helped welcome people into this great experience is the thing I'm most proud of.